Okay, as you can see, this video is going to be about one of our last ideas in evolution. It's about variation in genetic drift. So take a minute and jot down those page numbers, and we're going to get started here. Okay, a few definitions. First off, you need to know what a gene pool is. A gene pool is all the genes, and that would mean all of the alleles found in a population. And just to remind you what a population is, the scientist sets the population. So it's the size area that you're studying, and it's all the organisms of one type, of one species that are living in that area at the same time. So it's all the alleles that exist in that population. That's our gene pool. Another idea that is related to this is the relative frequency. Okay, relative frequency is the percent of a specific type of allele that's present in a population. Now we're going to do an example with this in just a minute, so that will help you to understand this a little bit better, I think. And then we're going to have a slightly different definition of evolution here. It's still evolution, but this is more of like a population evolution, sort of like we did with the pepper moths. Evolution with regard to this, with a population, would be the change in those relative frequencies. And let me show you what I mean on the next slide here. So remember, if you need to pause to write this down, absolutely do that. But I'm just going to keep moving and then just hit play whenever you're ready. Alright, so take a look here at this picture. So let's say that these are some mice, and we are surveying some mouse population in an old abandoned barn somewhere. Okay? And let's just say, for the sake of the numbers being nice and even, let's say these numbers are out of 100. Okay? So we'll get rid of the percentages and we'll say this is out of 100, okay? So what we're seeing here is that we have 48 of the mice are heterozygous black, which means they have one black allele and they have one brown allele. Okay, 16 are homozygous black and 36 are homozygous brown. So if we take a look at this, our gene pool, the size of it, we have 100 members times 2 alleles for each creature. So we have 200 alleles in our gene pool. Alright? Now, if we want to figure out the relative frequency of the black allele, it's this simple. Out of the total, which is 200 alleles, how many of them are the black allele? Alright, well, let's look right here. Here we have 16 mice, and they each have 1, 2 black alleles. So that means we'd have 32. Okay. And then over here, we have 48 mice, and each one has 1 black allele. So this would be plus 48. That's how many black alleles there exist in this population. Alright, so if we do the math here, what we'll get is we will get 80 over 200. And if you figure that out as a percentage, okay, or if we don't multiply by 100, you know, it's 0.4. We do that times 100. 40% of the alleles are the black fur allele. Okay? Relative frequency of the brown allele, we do the same logic, but for all of the brown alleles. It's still going to be out of 200, because that's how many alleles we have total. Okay? So let's start here with this one. Here we have 36 mice, and they each have 2 alleles. So 2 times 36 is 72. Plus, we're back up here to this 48, because they're heterozygous, so they each bring 1 brown allele. So 48 times 1 is 48. So if we add these up, we have 120 over 200. Which if you divide that out, it'd be 0.6. If we want to get a percentage, you guys know you just multiply by 100. And that would mean 60% of our gene pool is the brown allele. And this was 40% was our black allele. That's what relative frequency means. Now let me give you an idea of what we mean by evolution of a population here. Let's say that those are our numbers now. Let's say 10 years from now, we go back to this barn and we revisit it. And we do these same calculations again. Okay, we trap 100 mice at random and we figure out their genotypes. Let me do this in a different ink here. Let's say that years later we take a look, and let's say this number has shifted to 75%. We can talk about how that happens in just a minute. And let's say this became 25%. Well, because the relative frequencies have changed, we would say this population of mice has experienced evolution. Now, we're not saying they're anything other than mice. This is just like the peppered moths, okay? They're still mice, but the makeup of the population has shifted. It used to be, you know, a slight majority of the alleles were brown. Now it's a high majority of them are black. So we would say that the population has experienced evolution. The population has changed over time. Okay? And if you don't quite get it, just read this definition down here again. Another way of looking at evolution with a population is a change in the relative frequency of alleles. Well, that's what happened. Our relative frequencies changed. So we'd say this population experienced evolution. Now, we're going to get to the how of that. How can a population experience evolution? How? What causes these relative frequencies to change? Okay, a little bit of a review. You guys know variation just happens within a species. We said that is super important. Okay, a species or even a population that has variety to it makes that population strong. That way, if the environment does shift, some of the members can survive, even if others cannot. Okay, so as we talked about variation. Now, if we go back to our mice here, we're talking about color. We have two varieties. We have black and brown. Okay, maybe the environment switched in such a way that now the black, maybe they had better camouflage, or their predators were more attracted to the brown, or whatever it was. So we can see that this variety has allowed these mice to live. If all we had was the brown variety, these might go extinct because the brown are getting hunted or aren't reproducing or something. But because we have the black variety, they're now having an advantage, and that's good for the species because it can go on. All right, remember we talked about the sources of variation? We said what gives new varieties. You guys know mutations do, and a few of the things associated with sexual reproduction. So mutations, you guys know that does not give superpowers, but it produces different varieties of DNA. It could cause genes to not function very well. It could cause a mutation that's harmful. It can make one of those silent mutations. We talked about those. Or it could cause a mutation that gives the animal a survival advantage. Okay, so we talked about mutations already. Okay, spontaneous mutations always happen. Okay, you guys know DNA replication messes up, exposure to UV light and radiation, those sorts of things. We're not going to get rid of mutations. They just happen. Okay, we know sexual reproduction gives new varieties of things. Okay, and you guys know meiosis, we have things like crossing over happening, we have random combination of sperm with a random egg, we have all of those things happening, so sexual reproduction makes new varieties all the time, so that's another source of variety. Okay, and guys, we wrote this out already. Okay, we did that line. Okay, we know that natural selection basically selects who survives and who doesn't based on adaptations. Guys, and adaptations, they're phenotypes. Okay, then that leads to fitness. All right, so if an individual has a bad phenotype, it will die without reproducing, and those bad alleles won't contribute to the gene pool, or they won't contribute for very long. If an individual has good adaptations and is more fit, the natural selection will select that one to live, and it will keep putting its genes back into the gene pool year after year after year, because that's what happens. And therefore, whatever made it more fit, that's going to increase in frequency. Okay? So if I go back, I'll come right back to that. If I go back to here, something's happening with this mouse population where the black coloration is giving a survival advantage. That is making the dark ones more fit. So they're putting their genes in the gene pool more often, they're reproducing, they're living longer. So that is how the population evolved. Something happened where the brown is now at a disadvantage and the black is at an advantage. So the brown is not contributing to the gene pool as much, whereas the black is. Okay? So guys, I know I'm going quickly, so feel free to pause it whenever you feel that's necessary to get this stuff down, okay? All right, another idea. Now guys, this is easy to understand. It's just some more words you have to master. Here's another way how that brown-black mouse population could evolve, how the colors could change, okay? It could have changed due to genetic drift. That's different than sexual reproduction. That's different than mutations. Genetic drift is when the genes drift, okay? It's when you get a random change in the number of alleles, okay? The shift changes the appearance of the population, just like we saw. Maybe now you're predominantly a black-furred mouse population. And it just happens by chance. I want to give you 3 examples of genetic drift, 3 ways that alleles can change and populations can look different other than mutating, other than sexual reproduction. So how are ways that genes can drift? Sometimes this is called gene flow, okay, where genes are going to flow. So I'll put also known as, aka, sometimes genes flow. Okay, we sort of said that already. Okay, here's your number 1. Genetic drift, like we just said, sometimes this is just straight called gene flow. And this is when genes flow into and out of the population. Now, how would that happen? Some organisms move into the population, some move out. Guys, this happens all the time. Okay, we think about people coming to America. As an example I'll use, a lot of immigration. Well, they're bringing genes from their gene pool, which might be different than what was here at the time, into our gene pool. Emigration's the same thing. As organisms leave, they take their genes with them, so those genes leave the gene pool. Okay? So with our black and brown mice, maybe it's just a whole bunch of black mice moved into that barn we were studying. Maybe it was just gene flow, that we had a lot of immigration of black-furred mice. It could be as simple as that. Okay, so take a minute and jot that down. I don't know if you need this specific example, okay? You guys know emigration, immigration, the genes come with the people, or with the mice, or with the dandelion seeds that blew into your yard, or whatever it was. Okay, here's the second one, the founder effect. The founder effect is, think about like the 13 original colonies, okay? It's when Europeans first came to North America, okay? So a small group gets isolated and separated from the others. Okay, that actually will decrease variety because you're only bringing a small sample from the original population. Okay, think of this as almost like that geographic isolation. We talked about that with reproductive isolation. So some get to a new area, okay? Now, take a look at this picture with me. Down here, the original gene pool, look at all the colors they have. They got some purples and some orangish reds and some yellows, okay? Well, because only some of them get brought over to the new location, they can only bring the genes that they have. You've lost the orange-red variety because the only ones that came over were the ones, I guess, that this bird brought, and maybe it only had the alleles for purple and yellow. So now you're only going to get purple and yellow because it was just random ones that got brought over here. Okay, it sounds a lot like immigration because it's similar, okay? But a founder effect is where organisms get to a spot they've never been to before, and they're sort of the founders of a new population. It won't have the variety as the old population. Okay, and here's your third one. We'll skip that. The third one's a bottleneck effect. This picture is good because it shows you what would happen and why it's called bottleneck. Basically, a natural disaster happens and only a few of the organisms survive, okay? The neck of the bottle represents the natural disaster, okay? And whatever it was, a wildfire, human activity, disease, whatever it was, natural disaster wipes out most of the population, only a few survive. The surviving ones, they don't have the variety that the old population have. The reason why they lack the variety is that not every single phenotype was represented in those survivors. Okay, so the surviving population, I mean, it could repopulate, but it'll have less variety because look, there's no yellow ones there. So they just have less variety than what the original population had. Okay, and here's another example of bottleneck effect. Okay, through Thanos in there. So when he did the snap, he got rid of lots of varieties of everything. Okay, that is a good example of bottleneck effect. Okay, a strange disaster happens, gets rid of a lot of the variety. All right. So I know I went very quickly. Feel free to pause, rewind, get those definitions, and let me know if you have any questions, okay?